Have you ever loved someone so deeply you believed they'd be there when you needed them most? I mean, really think about that. Waking up from surgery, your body in pain, your heart vulnerable, and the one person who should have been by your side is already gone. Not gone to work, not gone to get food, gone to another country, with enough. And then, imagine this. You're lying there in that cold hospital bed, still hooked up to machines, when your phone lights up with a video. It's him, laughing, holding her like he never existed. While you're still healing from the cuts he never planned to stop. It's not just betrayal, it's erasure. And she saw it all. Awake, watching. And now the game is about to change. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed faintly as the room exhaled that sterile chill only hospitals knew how to breathe. Machines beeped in a slow, predictable rhythm beside her, syncing with the rise and fall of her chest. Eleanor Blake lay there, fragile in body but stubborn in mind, her eyelids fluttering with the weight of anesthesia still fading from her system. Her mouth was dry, her limbs sluggish, but her mind was not asleep. And when the door creaked open and Marcus walked in, dressed in his charcoal travel suit with his watch already glinting from his wrist, she knew. She didn't cry. Not then, not later, not even when he leaned down to kiss her forehead and whispered, "Rest up, baby, I'll be back before you know it." His voice had that casual rhythm. It always did when he was lying, smooth, practiced, distant. He brushed a strand of hair from her face, fingers barely touching her skin, then straightened his tie like he was late for a dinner reservation. She could smell the cologne he only wore for events, sandalwood and ambition, and it stung more than the 4 needles piercing her vein. He left without looking back. The sound of his leather soles vanished down the hallway like retreating gunfire, each step a confirmation of what she already suspected. He wasn't going to a business meeting. He wasn't stepping out to grab coffee. He was leaving completely, and not alone. Eleanor's phone vibrated from her bedside table. With effort, she reached for it, ignoring the pull in her abdomen where her body had been sewn back together. The screen lit up, and her heart didn't skip. It slowed. Her home screen, normally empty, now displayed a live feed from a popular Mykonos music festival. The algorithm had recommended it. Funny, really. She opened the feed. The music was deafening even through the small speaker of her phone. Lights strobed across thousands of bodies dancing under the Aegean moon. Then, as the camera panned over the VIP balcony, the crowd screamed louder. And there he was. Marcus Langford, her husband, standing at the edge of the platform with a drink in one hand, the other wrapped tightly around a woman's waist. She wasn't some stranger either. Eleanor recognized Sierra instantly, her face plastered across tabloids and social media posts, a model and influencer with a body built for attention and a hunger for fame. Sierra turned slightly, laughing at something Marcus said, and he pulled her close, burying his face in her neck. Like they'd been lovers forever. Then the camera, big, bold, and live, zoomed in, caught them in 4K, captured every inch of betrayal, and blasted it on the LED screen behind the DJ, like a public execution of vows. Sierra noticed first. Her smile faltered. Marcus followed her gaze and froze for a second. He looked directly into the lens, as if he saw Eleanor through it in her hospital bed. Eleanor blinked slowly. The pain from her surgery was dull compared to the sharp, hot twist blooming beneath her ribs. She let the phone slip to the bed. Her fingers trembled, but not from medication. He was in Mykonos with his mistress, and he thought she wouldn't find out, or worse, he didn't care if she did. A nurse came in moments later to check her vitals. "Everything looks fine," the woman said, voice cheerful and oblivious. "You should rest." Eleanor didn't answer. Instead, she stared at the ceiling tiles, counting them, 18 in total, 4 flickering slightly. That night, she requested an early discharge, but the doctor recommended at least another 24 hours. The nurse began flipping through her chart. "I'm signing myself out," Eleanor said, her voice soft but iron-willed. "Get me the forms." She dressed herself slowly, slipping into the soft black pants and oversized sweater she had worn to the hospital. She didn't bother to brush her hair, just tied it back and slid on her flats. Before leaving, she paused by the window and stared into the city beyond. There was something achingly quiet about Los Angeles at night from a hospital window. The streets pulsed below, but up here, detached, suspended, it felt like another planet. Her phone buzzed again. A message from Sierra's public Instagram story. Sierra posing with Marcus near a yacht in the harbor. The caption, "Sunset with someone who knows how to keep promises." Promises. Eleanor turned off her phone. Downstairs a black car waited. Not an Uber. Not a cab. A car she hadn't seen in years. Nolan sat behind the wheel. He didn't wave, didn't smile, just got out, opened the back door and waited. She hesitated for a moment at the curb, gripping her discharge folder with trembling fingers. "You look like hell," he said as she slid in. "Feel like it too," she muttered. "Where to?" "Somewhere he won't look." Nolan nodded and merged into traffic. He didn't ask for details. He already knew. The silence between them was thick with old history and unsaid truths. As the city blurred past them, Eleanor reached into her bag and pulled out a small envelope her father had given her years ago. One of those in case anything ever happens kind of things. She'd forgotten about it until the surgery, until Marcus's absence reminded her of every wrong choice. She opened the envelope. Inside was a key, gold, worn, heavy, and a letter in her father's handwriting. She scanned the first line. "If he ever makes you feel small, this key will remind you that you were never meant to fit into his world. You were meant to build your own." Her throat tightened. Nolan watched her from the corner of his eye, but said nothing. They drove in silence to an address she didn't recognize, tucked between old brick buildings and an upscale residential row in Westwood Hills. The apartment was nothing like the penthouse she once shared with Marcus. It smelled like cedar and citrus and old money. A safe place. A quiet place. Her father's final gift. Nolan handed her another folder before leaving. "It's already in motion," he said, "but you have to be sure." "I am." He didn't ask what changed. He didn't need to. Later that night, Eleanor lay in bed with her surgical wounds still sore, her emotions raw, her mind sharp as a scalpel. She opened her laptop, searched for every article, post, and tag Sierra had ever been linked to, cross-referenced Marcus's financial dealings, looked for the gaps, those blind spots she used to cover for him without hesitation. Not this time. This time, she wasn't the silent partner. She was the spark. And somewhere above the Aegean Sea, on a yacht dancing with laughter and excess, Marcus Langford had no idea that the woman he left in a hospital bed had just made her first move. He thought he'd kissed her goodbye, but all he did was give her time to plan. If you were in Eleanor's shoes, fresh out of surgery and betrayed by the one person you trusted, what would you do? Drop a comment below and tell us your move. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and rate the story from 0 to 10. Your support keeps stories like this alive. Eleanor didn't sleep that night, not because of the pain, though it was there, deep in her side like a low hum, but because her mind was louder than her body. She sat on the edge of the bed in the apartment Nolan had set up, knees drawn to her chest, like a woman half her age staring at the screen of her phone while a reel looped again and again. The festival footage had gone viral, as if the internet itself had decided that betrayal was best served in high definition. The image was burned into her brain now. Marcus, arms wrapped around Sierra, the two of them caught in that golden hour glow that made everything look beautiful, even lies. He was smiling, not the corporate smile he gave shareholders or the bland grin he offered photographers. This one was different, real, unfiltered. A smile of comfort, intimacy, familiarity, and it wasn't hers. It hadn't been in a long time. She watched them laugh as the camera panned and settled, capturing them like royalty. Sierra's head tilted back in flirtation, Marcus whispering something in her ear. When they realized they were being projected onto the massive stage screens, they both looked up, startled. Sierra's eyes widened in momentary panic, her fingers tightening around his. Marcus's smile slipped for just a second before snapping back too fast, as if he remembered they were being watched. As if the lie only mattered if someone called it out loud. Eleanor pressed pause and zoomed in. It wasn't just the moment, it was what it represented. He didn't stumble into this. He didn't get caught. He chose this. He chose to be public, loud. He didn't mind who saw, and that, more than anything, made her sick. Not because she still loved him, but because she had once believed he was capable of love at all. Outside, the city slept, but inside, Eleanor was wide awake. In the morning, Nolan arrived with a bag of groceries and a copy of a local paper. No headlines about Marcus, not yet, but his face would make it eventually. Viral clips didn't stay underground for long. The public loved a scandal. And a millionaire dancing with his mistress while his wife recovered from surgery was exactly the kind of tale people couldn't resist. Eleanor took the paper and skimmed the headlines, then folded it neatly and set it aside. "Where are we with the documents?" she asked. Nolan raised an eyebrow. "Good morning to you too?" She stared at him. He sighed, placing the bag on the kitchen counter. "They're in motion. You'll get full digital access by the end of the day. I've got Westbridge's legal counsel on standby, and the shell entities your father created, still airtight. Logan, that's Marcus's CFO. He won't see them coming. They've been buried deep for years. Almost elegant, really." Eleanor didn't smile. "How much do I control right now?" "Directly." Nolan leaned on the counter, scanning the list on his phone. 6 properties through holding companies, partial control of the Langford Urban Development Fund, and 2 real estate trusts he's using for upcoming projects in Dubai and Prague. But that's just what's already signed. Once the other releases come through, you'll be in a position to influence his liquidity. He paused. "So he'll feel it, like stepping into an empty pool." Eleanor nodded, staring past him at nothing. Later that day, while Nolan handled logistics, Eleanor went online, not to post, not to scroll, but to study. She followed every thread, every tag Sierra had ever appeared in. She wasn't just a fling. Sierra had been the campaign face for Marcus's latest real estate expansion along the Aegean coast. The timing was too perfect. The interviews where she said things like "a strong man knows when to let a woman lead" suddenly sounded rehearsed, calculated. Sierra had a brand, and that brand was currently built on being the new queen beside the millionaire. But even queens were disposable when the crown slipped. Eleanor leaned back on the couch, the laptop screen glowing across her tired features. She didn't hate Sierra. That would have been too easy. Sierra was a symptom, not the disease. Marcus had written this ending long before Sierra arrived. She was just the mirror that reflected the rot. He'd been trying to decorate it. The intercom buzzed. Delivery. Nolan opened the door and returned with a sealed envelope. Thin, pristine, no return address. Eleanor took it, heart pounding before she even knew why. She didn't recognize the handwriting, but the contents made her stomach turn. Inside was a printout, a still image from Sierra's story post. Her and Marcus, posing on a yacht with the sunset behind them. Caption: "My empire, my man, my weekend." Eleanor held it in her hands like a postcard from another planet. The date and time, the night of her surgery, not a coincidence. Nolan looked over her shoulder and exhaled. "They're really pushing it, aren't they?" "No," Eleanor said, folding the photo. "They're flaunting it. That's different." That evening, she called an old friend, Celeste, a journalist she hadn't spoken to in years. The kind of woman who always claimed to be off record even when she wasn't. They'd met once in Rome during a sustainability gala, and Celeste had always liked Eleanor more than she ever liked Marcus. When Eleanor's name popped up on her screen, Celeste answered on the first ring. "Well, this is unexpected." "Do you still freelance for Civitas Style?" Eleanor asked, skipping pleasantries. "I do, but I thought you hated them." "I do. You sound different." "I am." There was a pause, then Celeste's tone shifted. "What do you need?" "Just a story," Eleanor said. "Something real. Quiet, no names, just a whisper. I want people to start asking where I went, not because I'm missing, because I'm building something." Celeste chuckled. "Now that's a headline." "No headline," Eleanor said. "Not yet." By midnight, the article was live. A blind item. No names, no locations, just a story of a woman whose husband left her at her weakest moment for another life overseas, and how she quietly reclaimed what he thought he owned. It wasn't revenge porn. It was elegance. Subtle, sharp. The comments exploded. "Is this real? I bet I know who this is about. Whoever she is, I'm rooting for her." Eleanor closed the laptop and stared at the dark screen. Her reflection stared back. Tired, still healing, but undeniably present. She whispered, more to herself than anyone else, "Let's see if he notices." And he did. The next morning, across the Atlantic, Marcus stood on the terrace of their Mykonos villa, sipping espresso and scrolling through his phone. Sierra was still asleep, tangled in white sheets, her bare back to the door. He leaned on the railing, watching the waves curl against the sand, but something in his gut twisted. Something small. It started with a text from his assistant. "Have you seen the article going around?" He ignored it. Then another ping. You should call Nolan. Something's happening. His phone buzzed again. This time an alert from his private portfolio. A minor shift. A transfer pending. Not enough to set off alarms, but enough to make him furrow his brow. He glanced over his shoulder. Sierra stirred, mumbling something in her sleep. He turned back to his phone. Opened the article. Read it. Didn't react at first, just stared. And then he laughed. Not out of humor, out of disbelief. She wouldn't, he muttered. But he wasn't sure. He tapped into his banking dashboard. Waited. Another alert. Another transfer. No breach detected. All legal. Then he saw the name. The account behind the transfer. Westbridge. His stomach dropped. The same trust her father once operated. The one Marcus believed had been dissolved years ago. And there it was. Alive. Active. Authorized. He dropped his espresso. The cup shattered. Sierra sat up, confused. What happened? He didn't answer. For the first time in years, he didn't know what to say. Because for the first time in years, Marcus Langford realized he wasn't the one writing the script anymore. And someone else had just taken control of the next scene. The morning sun poured through the wide windows of the Westwood apartment, casting golden lines across the hardwood floor, and for the first time in a long time, Eleanor Blake felt like she could breathe without effort. The city below stirred, but inside, her world remained still. Deliberate. Calculated. Quiet. She sat at the small breakfast table, stirring a spoonful of honey into her tea, eyes fixed not on the drink, but on the man across from her. Nolan had come dressed in his usual black blazer, buttoned down, no tie. His expression was unreadable, but his silence told her more than any words ever could. The thick leather folder he placed on the table made a soft thump that echoed far louder than it should have. She didn't reach for it immediately. Instead, she lifted her cup, sipped slowly, and said, "Tell me exactly what I'm holding." Nolan opened the folder, his fingers brushing across the tabs as if unlocking an old vault. "This is the Westbridge Trust," he began. "Your father created it 15 years ago, used layered LLCs, offshore shells, everything he'd learned over 3 decades in private equity. When he passed, the assets were moved quietly. Just enough activity to keep them legally valid, but quiet enough to be forgotten, at least by anyone not looking." He flipped through documents as he spoke. Property deeds, corporate filings, investment notes. Marcus believed the trust was dissolved because your father wanted him to believe it, and because you never contested it. That narrative held. But now, with these signatures, your signatures, you have full operational control. Eleanor's fingers brushed the edge of a document. "How much are we talking?" "Conservatively, north of 70 million in hard assets, closer to 100 if you include strategic leverage, meaning the deals Marcus needs, but can no longer authorize a loan for." Nolan paused. "The timing is key. He's already under pressure from the Dubai project. His liquidity is tight. He can't afford a disruption in Prague, but Westbridge owns half the land under his build site." "He doesn't know that yet," Eleanor said. Nolan nodded. "Not yet." Eleanor nodded slowly, absorbing each word like a chess player reviewing the board after a brilliant move. "And the clauses, the ones in our marital contract?" Nolan slid a separate set of papers toward her. "Here, page 9, subclause 3. You were smarter than you gave yourself credit for. The clause allows you full voting control over any trust transferred into your name during your marriage. Marcus agreed to it when the company was still a startup. You were the primary investor. He needed your capital and your credibility. He didn't think I'd ever use it." "He didn't think you'd need to," Nolan said, offering a grim smile. He was wrong. For the next hour, they sat in that sunlit kitchen going line by line through the empire Marcus believed was his. Corporate structures, property layers, subsidiary movements. It was like dissecting a beast. By the time they finished, Eleanor leaned back in her chair and exhaled slowly. The sense of clarity was dizzying. Not anger, not vengeance, control. For the first time, she felt it return to her hands, not like a weapon, but like a compass pointing north again. She stood and walked to the window. Below, people bustled to work. Coffee in one hand, phones in the other, all moving with purpose. She had once moved like that, back when she worked in mergers and acquisitions, before her name was erased behind Marcus's title, and she became a quiet figure in expensive clothes, applauding his speeches, posing for magazine features as the woman behind the man. Funny how easy it was to be erased when you stopped saying your own name aloud. "I want to meet with Claudia from Paragon Group," she said suddenly, turning to Nolan. "She's been circling Marcus's firm for months. If I make an offer now, silent through Westbridge, she'll bite." "You want to trigger a buyout?" "No," Eleanor said, a hint of steel in her tone. "I want to trigger doubt. I want people in his circle to wonder if they're on a sinking ship." Nolan raised an eyebrow. "You're good at this. I used to be better," she said softly, "but he made me forget." That night she sat alone in the study, scrolling through old digital files, photos, legal memos, press clippings. The memories weren't painful, but they were sharp. One in particular stood out, an old video from the early days of their company. Back when it was just her, Marcus, and 3 interns crammed into a loft space that smelled like drywall and startup dreams. In the video, Marcus stood before a whiteboard, trying to sketch out a brand strategy. Eleanor, off camera, offered calm, clear corrections. At the end of the clip, he turned, grinned, and said, "She's the one with the brains. I'm just the one who talks loud." And that had been the truth for a while, until the loud talking drowned out her voice entirely. She closed the laptop and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. Her body still ached in places, the remnants of surgery reminding her she wasn't invincible. But mentally, she was sharper than she had been in years. The betrayal didn't weaken her, it focused her. Marcus's kiss goodbye, his flight to Mykonos, Sierra's smug captions, all of it had lit a fire, not to burn him down but to light her own way forward. Her phone buzzed again. This time, a message from Claudia. "Just heard about the Prague stake. You're full Westbridge now?" Eleanor didn't answer right away. She watched the blinking cursor like a heartbeat, then typed, "All of it." Claudia replied with a single word, "Finally." But before she could put the phone down, Eleanor hesitated, just for a moment. A thought, uninvited, crept into the back of her mind. What if she was wrong? What if this was too much, too fast, too cold? The part of her that had once questioned everything, the voice that had whispered, "Maybe you're the one overreaching," stirred quietly. But the feeling passed just as quickly as it came, because doubt had lived in her for far too long, and it had gotten her nowhere. The next day, Nolan arranged a call with the financial firm managing the secondary holdings Marcus had been using to support his personal expenses. Eleanor listened in silence as Nolan calmly explained the legal change in authorization, the updated signature cards, and the transfer of voting rights. There were no objections, just silence. Then the clicks of confirmation. When the call ended, Nolan looked over. "You just unplugged his jet." "He can still fly," she said. "He just has to pay for fuel now." They both smiled. Across the world on that same morning, Marcus sat in the sun-drenched courtyard of his Mykonos villa, watching Sierra take slow, exaggerated sips of orange juice while posing for Instagram. He wasn't smiling. His mind was elsewhere. He'd received 3 calls that morning, all with the same unsettling message. "Your access is being reviewed." He called his assistant, who apologized nervously. "I'm not sure what's happening, sir. The IT department says it's not a breach, it's a reassignment." A reassignment? He didn't even know what that meant. Then the CFO called. "Marcus, there's something going on with Prague." "What do you mean?" "The landholders are changing. The deed is being transferred to a trust called Westbridge." Marcus's throat dried. "That's not possible." "I thought the same, but it's happening. And there's more. Claudia from Paragon just reached out. She's asking questions about your long-term solvency." He hung up mid-sentence, walked to the edge of the infinity pool, breathing hard. Sierra came up beside him, oblivious. "You okay, babe?" He didn't answer, because suddenly in his mind there was an image. Eleanor in a hospital bed, watching him on a screen. Not broken, not angry, just watching. And now it all made sense. She hadn't vanished, she hadn't cried, she'd waited. And now, her long game had begun. He turned back toward the house, already dialing his lawyer. But deep down, even as the line rang, he knew he was already too late. Mykonos had a pulse, and it throbbed beneath the surface of everything, the sand, the water, the breathless heat that clung to skin like silk. The rhythm never stopped, even at noon, when most of the island nursed hangovers and secrets. There was always motion. A drink poured, a DJ spinning in some beachfront booth, another yacht drifting toward another invitation-only cove. The rich came here to forget. And Marcus Langford had long mastered the art of erasure. Or at least, he believed he had. He stood at the edge of the hotel's rooftop infinity pool, shirtless, tanned, and numb to the sting of the salt air. Below, the streets throbbed with tourists and music and flashing cameras. But up here, time moved slower. Or maybe it was just him who was off now. Sierra was in the lounge chair, legs crossed, sunglasses oversized, her phone glowing in her hands as she flipped through posts and stories. Each new notification feeding her like oxygen. She didn't sense the shift in the air. Not yet. She still believed they were untouchable. She still thought this trip was a celebration. Marcus had told her as much, that he'd closed 2 international deals, that everything was fine, that his wife was recovering just fine, and that this weekend was his reward for a season of stress. But even as he toasted her last night, even as he pressed his lips to her neck while they danced on the yacht beneath bursts of fireworks, something inside him had changed. A chill, a tremor in his gut, like someone had whispered something terrible just behind his ear. It wasn't the article. He'd convinced himself that was just gossip. Maybe even an old tale, dusted off by a bored writer. But it had planted a seed, and by morning it had grown into full-blown unease. Things were being rearranged, moved under his feet. He'd called the Dubai office again. No answers. His attorney in New York said she was reviewing documents and couldn't comment, yet. Claudia still hadn't returned his messages. And Sierra, radiant Sierra, was still taking selfies. He pulled his phone from the table, thumbed through messages, and opened his banking app again. This time the access loaded slower than usual. Delays. Another red flag. When it finally opened, there it was. Another small asset freeze. Not a bank-wide hold. Not enough to scream fraud, but enough to scream strategy. Someone was closing doors before he could step through them. A push notification appeared. Live now, Sunrise Electronic Festival, main stage. He tapped it instinctively. Not because he cared about the event, but because he knew they would be there. The cameras always found them. The rich, the beautiful, the loud. The screen lit up in neon strobe. Drones zipped overhead, capturing wide shots of thousands packed shoulder to shoulder beneath a pinkening sky. Bass thumped, bodies swayed. The headliner screamed something into the mic, and the crowd answered like a single beast. It looked like chaos. It looked like freedom. And then, there he was, himself. The camera zoomed in without warning. The screen caught his own face in 4K, and Sierra's. Just behind him. Her arms wrapped loosely around his waist, their bodies moving together to the beat. He watched himself turn, whisper something into her ear. She laughed. He kissed her temple. It was intimate, comfortable. Too comfortable. The kind of moment that shouldn't have belonged to anyone but a wife. The kind of moment that told a story before words could. And then, as the drone feed broadcasted that image to the LED wall at the festival, stretching across the horizon, people cheered, then gasped, then laughed. Because recognition moved faster than shame. Sierra noticed first. Her head snapped up to the screen, her smile faltering. She looked at herself, at him, at what they were. Marcus followed her gaze. And for a moment, time stilled. The heat vanished, the music blurred, the crowd faded. All he saw was himself, projected, exposed. He lowered the phone, breathing shallowly. "They caught it," he muttered. Sierra tilted her glasses down, concerned. "What is? On the screen, it's live." She frowned, pulling her phone back up. Her fingers flew over the screen, checking the feed, the tags, the mentions. "Oh my God," she whispered. "It's everywhere." "Of course it is," he said, walking toward the edge of the pool, running a hand through his hair. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice brittle now. "We do nothing. It'll blow over." But he knew it wouldn't. Not this time, because this time, he wasn't just gossip in the tabloids. He was evidence, and someone Eleanor was watching. Probably had been all along. The footage would have been too easy for her to access. She didn't even need to hack anything. It was public. It was posted. It was shared. A million eyes had seen the moment he chose Sierra. A million strangers were now witnesses. He returned to the lounge chair and sat heavily, draping a towel over his lap like it could shield him from the truth. Sierra kept scrolling. "People are tagging me with the worst comments. Like homewrecker and wait till karma hits. Like I'm the villain here." He looked at her. Really looked at her. Her pout, her painted nails, her curated sadness. "You think you're not?" She blinked, stunned. "What's that supposed to mean?" He didn't answer. He didn't want to have this conversation. Not now. Not with the world closing in and the walls of his empire starting to shiver. He stood abruptly. I need a drink. It's 10 a.m. I wasn't asking for permission, he said, already walking away. Later that afternoon, as the heat of the day pressed into the hotel like a thick hand, Marcus found himself alone in the suite's office. The room was modern, sterile, glass and marble and cold steel, but it gave him something he needed. Silence. He opened his laptop, clicked into his files, started tracing the threads. Westbridge kept appearing. The name was everywhere now, connected to properties, investments, funds. He searched its origins, offshore, untraceable past a certain point. But the signatures on recent filings, they matched a familiar handwriting. Eleanor. He sat back, heart pounding. She hadn't just walked away. She'd been preparing. While he flew to parties and posed for cameras, she'd been navigating through shadows, threading her way back into the system he thought he had cut her out of. She hadn't made a scene. She didn't go public. She simply took back what was already hers. He picked up his phone, called his lawyer again, straight to voicemail. He swore, paced the room, and dialed another number. This time, Logan, his CFO, answered. But the voice on the other end was shaky. We've got issues, Logan said immediately. You're losing board confidence. Paragon is probing for a hostile acquisition, and your accounts are under legal audit. I thought you'd know. Westbridge filed a motion to restrict access to your remaining discretionary funds. It's looking like coordinated action. Strategic. Personal. Marcus stared at the wall. Marcus? Logan said. He didn't respond. Do you know who's behind it? He hung up. Outside, the music started again. A new wave of tourists cheered from the pool below. Life, as far as they could see, was a paradise. But up here, behind the tinted windows and a facade of wealth, everything was cracking. He turned off the laptop, walked into the bedroom. Sierra looked up from her phone. Are we going to the beach party tonight? No, he said. Why not? Because we need to disappear for a bit. She sat up straighter. Disappear? I need to fix something, he said. Is this about your wife? The word hit him harder than he expected. Wife. Still legally true, still emotionally volatile. He clenched his jaw. It's about what she took. Sierra folded her arms. Maybe you should have kept her, if she was so valuable. He glared at her. Sorry, she muttered, backing off. He sat on the edge of the bed, hands rubbing his face. What happens now? She asked quietly. I don't know, he said, voice hollow. But if she's doing this quietly, she's not finished. And deep down, he knew she wasn't. Because Eleanor Blake didn't believe in revenge. She believed in correction. And she was just getting started. The storm didn't come all at once. It started with small gusts. Rumors drifting through the Westwood elite like leaves stirred by wind. Whispers passed in gallery openings, investor brunches, and those sterile boardrooms that smelled like leather and calculation. Whispers that the Langford portfolio had sprung a leak. Not the kind that sinks a ship overnight, but the kind that signals, this ship is no longer unsinkable. And Eleanor heard every word. She didn't need to be in the room anymore to know what was being said. She'd built her name into too many rooms to be forgotten now, and slowly, the tide was turning. The morning headlines didn't name her directly, they never did, but the tone was different. Sources close to the Langford firm report internal restructuring. New players rumored to be circling weakened assets. An anonymous trust linked to legacy wealth is gaining influence. The pieces were moving, and even if the public didn't see the hand behind them, those who mattered did. The kinds of people who read between headlines and knew how to spot a ghost's signature in a shell company's paperwork. The kinds of people who used silence as leverage. Eleanor sat in the study that morning, reading through the chatter with a quiet intensity. Nolan stood nearby, arms folded, watching her. Claudia wants a call, he said finally. She's been approached by 2 more buyers this week, both trying to undercut your offer. But she knows they're coming in scared. If we move today, we lock her in. Eleanor looked up. Do it. And Logan? Let him sweat, Nolan replied. He smiled. You're enjoying this. I'm remembering who I am. Outside the window, the sky was a dull silver. No rain, just that thick, humid air that made the city feel slow and electric all at once. The kind of day when power didn't shout, it simmered. Eleanor rose from her chair, walked to the small cabinet near the far wall, and pulled out a bottle of bourbon her father used to save for serious decisions. She poured one finger's worth. No more. Not to celebrate, just to mark the moment. He's going to try something, Nolan warned. Marcus won't sit still. He doesn't know how. He may go to the press or dig up something from your past. You sure you're ready for that? Eleanor took a sip, eyes locked on the skyline. He's going to learn the difference between a scandal and a strategy. Later that day, the first of the private meetings happened. Nolan had arranged them with surgical precision, quiet, off-record, held in spaces that didn't appear in calendars. The men and women who arrived weren't interested in gossip. They were interested in returns. Eleanor presented her vision calmly, offering transparency without exposure, ambition without recklessness. She wasn't just repositioning assets, she was building something new, a legacy detached from Marcus's name, yet rooted in the soil they had once claimed together. Why now? One of the investors asked, older, skeptical. Because I was done being a passenger, she said. Is this about revenge? No, she replied. It's about clarity. I spent years believing in a man who forgot how to believe in anything but himself. I let my instincts go quiet, but they're awake again. I don't want to destroy him. I want to make him irrelevant. There was a long pause, then a nod. The room shifted. By evening, agreements were being drafted. Westbridge's reach widened, and somewhere in Mykonos, Marcus's world was shrinking, inch by inch. Sierra noticed first. The modeling agency pulled her from a campaign at the last minute, citing concerns about reputational impact. A tech startup she'd been slated to sponsor ghosted her completely. She pouted on the balcony, swiping through missed calls, each one more impersonal than the last. Why is everyone acting like I'm toxic? She asked, voice shrill with disbelief. Marcus didn't answer. He was on a call with Logan again, trying to spin the numbers into something palatable. We still have runway, he insisted. We're not bleeding. We're just restructuring. You're bleeding, Logan said flatly, and people smell it. What are they saying? That Westbridge is lining up to acquire you without ever announcing their name, that your wife is behind it, that you've lost control. Marcus clenched his jaw. She doesn't have the stomach for this. She didn't, Logan said. Now she does. Marcus hung up. The room felt smaller. He turned, looked at Sierra, who still hadn't put her phone down. He opened his mouth to say something, maybe to blame her, maybe to accuse. But stopped. What was the point? The woman who mattered wasn't here, and she wasn't listening anymore. Back in Brooklyn, Eleanor received a message that made her pause, an email from a name. She didn't expect Sophia Maddox, a quiet powerhouse in the world of high-end architecture, and a woman who had once refused to work with Langford due to creative differences. The email was brief. Heard what you're building. If you're serious about Prague, I'm in. Let's talk. Eleanor read it twice, then smiled. She didn't respond immediately. Some invitations are sweeter when you let them wait. Instead, she opened a folder marked personal. Inside were old documents from her first consulting firm, the one she shuttered when she married Marcus, contracts, presentations, logos she designed on napkins and post-its. She stared at them for a long time, as if reacquainting herself with a former life. It didn't feel foreign. It felt buried. She pulled one paper free and held it up to the light. Blake Strategies, her maiden name, her real one. Nolan knocked gently on the doorframe. Everything okay? I think I want it back, she said softly. The name, the firm, the identity, all of it. Nolan walked in, sat down. That changes the game. No, she said. It defines it. That night, Eleanor walked alone through the streets of the West Village, her coat tied around her shoulders, the city lights flickering off puddles and car windows. She didn't wear heels, she wore sneakers. She didn't check her reflection in passing windows. She walked straight, purposeful. Her world wasn't spinning, it was aligning. A text lit up her screen. Unknown number. You win. Can we talk? No name? But she didn't need one. She stared at the words, thumb hovering over the reply button. Then she turned off the screen. Because the game wasn't over. It had just begun. The invitation came 2 days later in the form of a cream-colored envelope slid beneath her door. Hand-delivered. No stamp, no return address. Eleanor recognized the handwriting instantly, even before she opened it. Marcus had always written with purpose. Each letter deliberate, like his signature wasn't just a name, but a statement. She held the envelope in her hand for a long time before tearing it open. The note inside was brief, like he couldn't bring himself to say too much. Or maybe because he knew she wouldn't tolerate more than a few sentences from him. It read, "Dinner. Just us. 1 hour. The Westbridge Suite, 1903. There was no apology, no question, no attempt at warmth, just instructions. As if he still thought he could summon her like before. She didn't answer, didn't text, didn't call. But when the hour came, she went, not because she wanted to see him, but because she needed to know how much of him was left. Not the man she married, he died long ago, but the illusion she once believed in. She arrived at the Westbridge in a black dress and low heels. No jewelry, no makeup beyond eyeliner and balm. There was power and simplicity. And tonight, Eleanor didn't want to distract from her presence. She wanted him to feel it. The elevator doors opened onto the penthouse floor. Suite 1903 loomed at the end of the hall, soft light spilling from the crack beneath the door. She knocked once. It opened immediately. Marcus stood there, still in the tailored style he'd always preferred. Dark slacks, open collar, sleeves rolled up. The kind of man who tried to look undone while still being perfectly calculated. He looked older, not by years, but by weight. There were shadows under his eyes. His jaw was tight. He stepped aside to let her in without a word. The suite was quiet. Candles flickered along the table where dinner waited. Steak, asparagus, something expensive. She didn't care to identify. 2 glasses of red wine already poured. A playlist she used to love played faintly from hidden speakers. All of it orchestrated. All of it false. "You came," he said finally. She walked past him, didn't sit. "What do you want to talk?" "You could have called. You wouldn't have answered." She turned to face him, arms crossed. "You're right. I wouldn't have." He exhaled, ran a hand through his hair, took a slow sip of wine. "This doesn't have to be war, Eleanor. Then you shouldn't have started one." He flinched slightly, not visibly, but enough for her to see it in the flicker of his eyes. "I made mistakes," he admitted. "But this power grab, you're trying to destroy everything I built." She tilted her head. "You mean everything we built?" He didn't answer. She stepped closer. "You left me in a hospital bed, Marcus. You kissed my forehead and got on a jet with a woman half your age. You danced with her in front of 100,000 people and thought no one would notice. You didn't just hurt me. You erased me. You replaced me. You made me feel like nothing. And now you're upset that I remembered I'm not." He sat down heavily at the table, rubbing his face. "It wasn't supposed to go this far." "No, you weren't supposed to get caught," she said, voice sharp. "That's the part you regret." Silence stretched between them. Finally, he said, "I was scared." She blinked. "Of what?" "You," he said, looking up at her. "You were always better at this than me. You were the mind behind the pitch decks. The reason people said yes in rooms I couldn't even enter. You were the credibility I borrowed to start the company," Marcus said, his voice low. "I watched you shine, and the more we grew, the more I shrank. And I hated that. So I told myself stories about your ambition, about your coldness, about how Sierra made me feel young again. I needed a story where I wasn't the villain." Eleanor sat slowly across from him. "And did that story end well?" "No," he whispered. She looked at him carefully. "You're not here because you're sorry. You're here because you're scared. You know what I've done, and you know I'm not finished." He looked at her, desperation bleeding through the cracks in his expression. "So what now?" She leaned forward, voice quiet but solid. "Now you learn what it feels like to lose things you thought were yours forever." "I can fix it," he said quickly. "We can fix it. I still have influence. I still have." "No," she interrupted. "You have debt. You have a reputation that's cracking. You have Sierra and Instagram and whatever's left of your dignity. What you don't have anymore is me, or my name, or my silence." Marcus slumped back, drained. She rose, walking toward the door. As she reached for the handle, he said, "You'll make me the villain." "You did that yourself," she said without turning around. She left without slamming the door. Quiet exits were always louder in the end. The next morning, Eleanor filed the final paperwork. The motion to unseal the marital clauses, the legal declaration to reclaim the Blake name as sole beneficiary of Westbridge, and one last filing, an LLC under a new brand name. Not her old firm. Something new. Something sharper. Something that didn't look back. By noon, the press got wind of the shifts. They didn't name her. Not yet, but the breadcrumbs were there. Anonymous buyer locks Langford out of Prague contract. Luxury real estate firm collapses under acquisition pressure. A mysterious trust outmaneuvers Langford Holdings. The stories wrote themselves. Nolan brought coffee into the study, watching her with quiet pride. "It's done," he said. "No," she corrected, taking the cup. "It's in motion." He sat beside her, flipping through the latest financial report. "You know what people are saying?" he asked. "That a woman scorned became the smartest move in modern real estate." She smiled. "Let them guess." He hesitated, then asked, "Do you think he ever really loved you?" She didn't answer for a long time. Finally, Eleanor said, "He loved having me." Later that night, she returned to the rooftop of her apartment, the place she used to escape to when the world became too loud. The wind was brisk. The lights of the city glittered like a million new beginnings. She stood at the edge, arms crossed, hair pulled back, and let herself feel the weight of everything. It didn't crush her. It steadied her. Her phone buzzed, another anonymous message. "Please just talk to me." She blocked the number, because some messages weren't worth answering. Not when the real message had already been sent. The silence that followed the storm was unfamiliar. Not the kind of silence that comes from peace, but the kind that follows impact. The echo of everything that was shattered, settling into a new shape. Marcus felt it most in the places he once called his own. Boardrooms, where his name no longer opened doors. Offices, where his voice had once carried weight and now barely registered. He wandered through the lobby of what used to be the Langford flagship building on Fifth Avenue, now branded with the stark, angular logo of Westbridge Capital, etched in brushed steel across the reception wall. No one stopped him. No one greeted him. Even the security guard, a man Marcus had once greeted by name, offered only a polite nod and went back to his tablet. His badge didn't work anymore. His access had been terminated 2 days prior. He knew this, but he swiped it anyway, like a ritual, as if it might still remember him. Inside, Eleanor sat at the head of the newly repurposed executive conference room. She wore a navy blue blazer over a cream blouse, her hair pulled into a low bun, no jewelry, save for a silver pen that clicked gently in her hand. Nolan stood beside her, distributing folders with the quiet efficiency of someone who knew exactly how much power sat at this table. The boardroom was full. Attorneys, strategists, financial directors, each carefully reviewing the terms of the acquisition and transition. This was the final sweep, the last step before everything Marcus once owned would be officially and legally absorbed. No lawsuits. No messy court battles. Just a silent takeover, one clause at a time. The art of correction, played like chess. Across town, Sierra sat alone in the hotel room they'd once shared, now dim and cold. The curtains remained drawn, and her reflection stared back at her from the black screen of a dead phone. The brand offers were gone, the invites had dried up. She wasn't scandalous anymore, just pitiful. Her agent had stopped responding to texts. The last headline that mentioned her name was 2 days old, and it was a meme, from yacht to forgotten. The mistress with nowhere to land. Marcus hadn't come back last night, hadn't texted, hadn't called. She suspected, maybe hoped, he was meeting with Eleanor, that they were reconciling, that there was still something left for him to salvage. But deep down, she knew better. The part of him that once leaned on her, the impulsive, uncertain part, was unraveling fast. Back at Alderbridge Holdings, Amelia Dawson rose slowly from her seat and walked to the expansive floor-to-ceiling windows. The city stretched below, chaotic, dazzling, unpredictable. But to her, it felt unfamiliar in a familiar way. Like something she had finally stepped into, not as a passenger but as the one steering. Not because she had taken revenge, but because she had reclaimed her voice. Her choice to stay present, to not vanish when it would have been easier, was what changed everything. There was a knock. Light, intentional. Theo stepped out briefly and returned with a look that said everything before he even spoke. "He's downstairs," he said simply. Amelia didn't respond right away. She tapped the glass once, eyes steady on the sidewalk below. "Did he ask to come up?" she asked. "No, just standing there, watching." She allowed herself a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "Let him." Theo gave a nod. Down on the sidewalk, Aaron Bennett stood beneath the shadow of the building that had once carried his name on the signage, 6 bold letters etched in steel. His coat was gray, collar pulled high against the Manhattan wind. No cufflinks, no watch, no pocket square. Just him, plain, raw, and far older than he had looked even weeks ago. Not because of time, but because of what had unraveled since. Gone was the confident tilt of his shoulders. In its place was a man who no longer believed he could fake certainty. He hadn't come to make amends. He didn't have the strength for that. Maybe he came to understand what had been built in his absence. Maybe he thought there'd be some small piece of it that still had space for him. Then his phone buzzed. No sender, just one clip. He tapped it. The drone footage. Again. Ibiza. Him and Sienna. Laughing, swaying, arms around each other as the light sliced the night in pulsing beams of color. It looked carefree. It looked curated. But this time, the clip didn't end with that moment. It cut to the hospital. The security cam footage. Grainy, raw. Amelia, awake, watching. Not just watching the screen, but watching him. His knees weakened. It wasn't the video. It was the realization. She had known the entire time, and still, no explosion, no confrontation. Just a silent shift, a calm execution. She had watched, she had waited, and then she had moved. Inside the tower, Amelia turned from the window and walked back to the table. "Let's finalize the Prague file," she said evenly. "The press wants a statement by morning." "Do you want to lead with the divorce?" Theo asked. "No," she said without pause. "That part's not news. That part's history." The room moved with precision. Papers turned, pens clicked, signatures looped across final contracts. The final nail in what had once been Aaron's empire was now an elegant legal formality. That evening, Amelia returned to her apartment. It was still calm in its silence. She poured herself a glass of wine, kicked off her shoes, and walked barefoot through the room, pausing briefly at the bookshelf, where she kept framed photos. She didn't take any of them down. Not out of nostalgia, but because there was no need to erase what had already been outgrown. The photos weren't false. They were just moments, pages from a book she no longer read aloud. That morning, she had received a small box, her new stationery. She opened it now. Crisp white cards, thick and smooth, embossed with simple black ink at the top. Amelia Dawson, founder. No logo, no ornamentation, no tagline, just the truth. Her phone buzzed again. A message from Claudia. "Prague's press conference is scheduled. Do you want the headline to spotlight Alderbridge's acquisition or your new firm?" Amelia typed back, "Neither." Then, after a pause, "Make the headline about the land. Not the woman who reclaimed it. Let the world connect the dots." Claudia responded with a single salute emoji. She left the phone on the counter and walked toward the open window. The air outside was cool, the breeze curling into the room like a gentle reminder. She closed her eyes. Let it move through her, cleansing, deliberate. She didn't think of Aaron, or Sienna, or the people who had once cheered her on until the applause became too complicated. She thought of the silence instead, the kind that speaks volumes, that demands nothing, yet commands everything. And in that silence, with New York spinning beyond the glass and her presence echoing through the empire he had once claimed, Amelia Dawson smiled, because now he knew what she once did. The hollow devastation of being invisible. But this time, he was the one fading. It was quiet in the hospital corridor, not the sharp, sterile hush of antiseptic and dread. This was something more intimate, delicate, the hush of closure. Room 317 still smelled faintly of antiseptic and the lavender balm the nurses used on their gloves. The bed was freshly made, but untouched. The machines had been removed. No beeping, no charts, no wires. Just soft sunlight through tilted blinds, casting golden stripes across the floor like punctuation at the end of a sentence. Amelia stood in the middle of the room, alone, looking at the place where she had once laid, stitched, swollen, abandoned without warning. The nurses had let her in early, before visiting hours, before the rhythm of the hospital caught up with its purpose. She hadn't asked for the exception, but they had given it anyway. Maybe they'd read the article. Maybe they simply remembered her. Or maybe it was something in the way she entered, silent, composed, with eyes that carried the weight of endings and the grace of survival. Amelia lowered herself slowly into the chair beside the bed. The same chair that had been empty the morning she'd awoken after surgery. She remembered looking toward it on instinct, expecting to see Aaron slumped there, half asleep, her hand in his, just like she had once held his after his rotator cuff procedure. But it had been empty. No jacket tossed over the back, no lukewarm coffee on the windowsill, just stillness, just abandonment. That moment hadn't broken her, it had sharpened her. Not because he left, but because she realized then, with a clarity that stung sharper than any scalpel, that he had never meant to stay. He'd been waiting for an exit, and the hospital had been the excuse he needed. Her fingers moved along the cool metal of the armrest. She remembered the ache, not just in her body but in her chest, the kind that came not from incisions or anesthesia, but from understanding that the ending had begun long before she was willing to name it. He had kissed her forehead. She remembered that too. Warm lips, steady hands. "Rest up," he'd said, like he meant it. But now she knew better. That kiss hadn't been comfort. It had been goodbye, a silent, selfish one. He didn't expect her to wake up alone. He didn't expect her to wake up changed. But she had. Across the city, Aaron sat in what remained of the penthouse. The electricity had been cut that morning. Final invoice paid. The furnishings had been picked off through quiet listings. Art sold to private collectors, the cellar emptied. The space now was hollow, a half-packed suitcase, a coat draped over a crate, and that peculiar echo of a once-lived life bouncing off cold walls. Sienna hadn't stayed. She left the week prior, after her last campaign deal collapsed. She hadn't said goodbye, only left a note near the sink that read, "I can't live in your aftermath." He hadn't chased her. He couldn't even blame her. By the window, he opened the last bottle of scotch, gifted by Amelia, back when he'd sealed his first London deal. The label had faded, the cork still tight. He poured a glass. It didn't taste like success. It tasted like regret. His phone lay next to him. He scrolled until he found her name. Amelia Dawson. No longer Amelia Hale. She'd reverted weeks ago, quietly, officially. One more footnote in a corporate bulletin. One more LinkedIn update. He stared at the message icon. He'd written to her before, some sent, most deleted, all unanswered. This time, his thumbs hovered, then typed, "I don't expect a reply. I just need you to know I saw the footage, the hospital. I didn't know, I swear. I didn't know you were watching." He paused, then added, "If I could undo anything, I wouldn't have boarded that plane." But he never hit send. Back in the quiet of room 317, Amelia placed a sealed envelope on the pillow. Inside, a single photograph. Italy. Taken years ago. Aaron had captured it without her noticing. She was laughing, hair tossed by the wind, one hand outstretched toward a flight of pigeons taking off. There was no performance in her posture, no polish, just joy, just breath, just life. She left no note inside, only the image. Let it speak, let it echo. Amelia turned and walked out of the room. The nurse at the front desk glanced up, offering a soft, knowing nod. "You okay?" she asked gently. Amelia nodded. "I think so." She stepped outside, the autumn air brushing against her skin like an old friend. The city around her had already shaken off its sleep. Taxis honking, cyclists weaving through lanes, voices shouting into phones, but she didn't rush. She moved slow, deliberate, unhurried. Her phone buzzed in her coat pocket. A message from Theo. The Prague contract had closed. Alderbridge's acquisition had doubled in valuation. Carter Strategies had just signed its first 3 clients. She replied with a single thumbs-up emoji, nothing else. Then turned her phone off. There was peace in not being reachable, in not being watched, summoned, or expected. That afternoon, she returned to the brownstone. The air inside still smelled faintly of cedar and early rain. She brewed a cup of tea, dropped the needle on a worn Miles Davis vinyl, and curled into the corner of the sofa with a book she had never finished. The last chapter had been marked for years, pages yellowing, the corner gently folded like a promise waiting to be kept. She read slowly, steady sips between lines, letting the words sink. When she reached the final page, she didn't cry. She didn't sigh. She closed the book with quiet finality, returned it to its shelf, then walked to the window and stood, watching the light stretch and fade across the wood floor. Outside, the world didn't pause, but inside her, there was stillness. Later that night, beneath a high silver moon, she stepped onto the balcony, lit a single candle, and let the flame flicker against the evening wind. She didn't make a wish. She didn't whisper to the stars. She just breathed. She didn't need closure. She was the closure. And miles away in a borrowed flat, Aaron stared at a blank ceiling. The silence was thick, but it wasn't sleep that evaded him. It was memory. Those 4 words, "Rest up," he had said, but he was the one who never did. So the story has ended, our wonderful friends. Are you still here, still reading, still feeling this with us? If you are, then maybe, just maybe, this story echoed something in your own heart. You see, Eleanor's journey wasn't about revenge or destruction. It was about remembering, about reclaiming the parts of ourselves that we sometimes give away too easily, to love, to comfort, to people who promise they'll stay. Maybe you've been there too. Maybe you felt that quiet sting of being forgotten, of someone walking away not with drama, but with the soft cruelty of silence. But Eleanor didn't collapse. She rose. Slowly, quietly, intentionally. She didn't need to shout or break things to prove her worth. She just had to remember who she was before the forgetting began. And that's something all of us can carry with us. Healing isn't loud. Growth isn't always pretty. Sometimes it's just one hard decision after another, until you're standing in the middle of your own life again. Steady. As the heterodox quote says, you will lose people, you will lose things, but the worst loss is the version of yourself you abandoned to keep them. Eleanor didn't get that version back by chance. She chose it. She fought for it. So if you're in the thick of your own storm, hear this. You're not erased. You're not done. You are allowed to start again, not from scratch, but from experience, from strength, from clarity. If this story made you feel something, if it helped you see yourself even a little clearer, please like, share, and subscribe. Someone else might need this reminder too. You never know whose heart you're helping light back up, just by passing a message forward. Thanks for staying. Thanks for feeling this with us. Now go stand in your story, with all the quiet power it deserves.